Welcome to the Christian Music Archive podcast, conversations about Christ, community, and music. I'm your host, Dave Maurer. As you know, this podcast is a sister project to the ChristianMusicArchive.com, where I've been documenting the artists and albums that we've been listening to for more than 5 decades. One of the things that has fascinated me is the number of artists who have moved to full-time ministry as a follow-up to their professional music career. One such musician is Michael James Murphy. Now, Michael recorded about 5 albums in the early 80s, and then he transitioned to more of a country sound in the 90s, where he released another 3 albums as Michael James. But an early call God placed on his life was to be involved in worship ministry. I was fascinated to hear Michael talk about the path of preparation God took him through as he transitioned from performing musician to positions as a worship leader and an administrative pastor. Michael talks about the divine appointments that God used during his early interest in music that all led to his current work at a church in the San Francisco Bay Area. Our conversation starts as Michael talks about how his love for music got started.
Well, 1964, the Beatles came to America, and my life was forever changed. I was 5 years old, kindergartner, and music captured me, and began to took piano lessons. Started at like 3rd grade. We had a piano, and I realized very early I could sit down and just by ear start playing things. And
Oh, wow.
my parents recognized that. My mother was a great singer, and actually, when she was in high school, she had I think there were 4 or 5 of them, of the girls, and they did a little single, and so she had always been a singer, and I've been around music, so much, and started taking piano at 3rd grade, and then crazy enough, when I was a 6th grader, I asked for a drum kit for Christmas, and I got a drum kit, and in those days, the church. 6th grade meant I was now in the youth ministry, and
Right.
which youth ministry back in the 70s was all about doing musicals. And so our church did all kinds of musicals, and we would do these choir tours, in the summer.
Yeah.
And even in our little small town in Texas, I grew up in a farming and ranching community in the panhandle of Texas. And
Okay.
we had, in our little town, we had over 50, 60 kids in our youth ministry, which is really
wow.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I started playing drums, and played drums in 6th grade, and fell in love with the guitar. And my dad got me a guitar from an insurance guy. I guess someone had had their guitar stolen. It was reclaimed, and I think he said he paid 15 or 20 bucks for it. It was a harmony guitar, and fell in love with the guitar. That kind of came, that and keyboards both were kind of, that. And so I played in our high school, our junior high and high school youth ministry there at our church, and then also had a band in high school that we would play for civic functions and play at the school, and
Right.
do all the 70s music of the day, James Taylor and the Eagles, and all that kind of stuff. Love Chicago and all those guys. So my senior year in high school, our church would do an annual ski trip. And like our whole town would literally, they had rather than spring break, we had a ski break. And so everybody would go to the mountains and go skiing.
Okay.
And
Right.
our church scheduled, where my dad was a pastor, scheduled the Cruz family, who were quite
Yeah.
huge at the time. I think they'd been nominated for Grammys, or maybe won a Grammys. And, they were on the Grand Ole Opry. They were like some of the
Yeah.
really early pioneers. And so they were there. They came in, and this was in Red River, New Mexico, and they came into the concert one night during the week. And I was asked to sing some of my songs that I've been kind of
Oh,
writing. And
fun.
so I got up and did 3 or 4 songs as an opening, and connected with their son, their youngest son, John.
Right.
John is now pastoring down with Gateway Church down in Fort Worth, and married to
Okay.
Janice Archer.
Right.
And they wanted to know what I was planning after high school. And I was going to go to college and study music down in Hardin Simmons University in Abilene, Texas. And so they offered me a job playing drums. And so literally the day after my high school graduation, I got on my very first plane flight that I'd ever been on.
Oh,
and
wow.
Braniff Airlines, which was alive and well there, flew out of Lubbock, Texas, and hopped on a tour bus with my guitar and my amplifier,
No
and
kidding.
began traveling through that whole summer before going off to college. But it was that relationship with them that God used in a real powerful way, because I got to meet some of the executives in the record industry. And so my college roommate Bobby Price and we kind of met, and come to find out, Bobby was like writing poetry and trying to write songs. And so we ended up starting writing songs together. And a college youth ministry in Abilene, Texas, uh, bought us a ticket, each of us round trip ticket to Nashville
Oh,
to
fun.
go pitch our songs. So we landed in Nashville, took a cab down to Music Row, and I went to the place that I knew, had some relationship with because of the Cruz family, and
Right.
resulted in getting our first song published. And then I ended up getting a publishing and a recording agreement with Zondervan. I actually sold my car. My wife Laura and I met in college as well. We were married in 1980, and that year she had a car, so I sold my Ford Pinto. Got enough money to do a demo,
Okay.
and did that in Oklahoma City. At a place, a guy named Ken Sarkey, who was a part of Cornerstone Recording, which was a part of a lot of major Christian music coming out
Okay.
of there at the time. A group called Seth, which had Kelly
Yep.
Willard, and Hadley Hawkinsmith was the guitar player, and Hadley's playing probably influenced me as a guitar player more than anyone. And
Yeah.
so many other musicians, and that were part of Andre Crouch's band, and
Yep.
there was just a lot of that. So I went there with and recorded 2 songs, and I ended up getting signed to Zondervan. And that year, I was signed along with Twyla Paris and Wayne Watson and Harvest. Trying to think of who else would have been a part of that crew of us that got signed. We were all signed within 6 months
Oh, wow.
to Zondervan's Milk and Honey Records, and so
Because they were just kind of establishing the label at that time, right?
they were, and they
Yeah.
really had been church music, like choral, and so a guy named Phil Brower, who had written a lot of popular church musicals in the day, I think just had a vision to be a part of contemporary music and to take
Hmm.
Zondervan there, and they
Right.
did. So I recorded 3 albums for them. Twyla Paris and I toured together for a couple of years together, where
Fun.
we kind of, I did my set and she would do her set, but I also kind of led the band, because I was
Okay.
doing a lot of recording sessions. And at that point, had moved to Tulsa when I got signed, because Twyla lived about an hour from Tulsa in Arkansas, because her
Gotcha.
father was part of Youth of the Mission, helping
Right.
launch that with her uncle. And a lot of the musicians, a lot of things were happening in Tulsa as well. Carmen was just getting discovered there, and there were about 4 recording studios between there and then also over in Oklahoma City. And so I did a lot of commercials, and played on a lot of custom albums,
Gotcha.
play guitar, and
Gotcha.
so kind of got that thing and toured with those guys. In '84, I think was the last year Twyla and I toured together, and then '86 I did one album with Home Sweet Home with Chris Christian,
Right.
and then moved to Nashville, on to Nashville from. We'd been in Tulsa. We came back to Texas, where we were from, my wife and I, and then we went on to Nashville in the late '80s. And
Is that when you changed your sound to focus more country?
yeah, and
Yeah.
kind of got back to, I think in the early days, as a musician, I was into so many styles that I was into. And
Sure.
like this, the second album was Surrender, and that album had some world class musicians. Like all the background vocalists were the folks that sang on all the Steely Dan records, and
Oh, wow.
John Patitucci played bass on my first 2 albums, and John is considered one of the top bass players in the
Yeah.
world now.
Absolutely.
And Keith Edwards was on drums, and Hadley Hawkinsmith played electric. David Mansfield also played on
Hmm.
that record, and Dave was in. Um, he was Bruce Hornsby in the Range, and let's see. Before that, I'm trying to think. Oh my gosh, he just the list of people there were incredible. And then a guy named Smitty Price was playing keys, and I ended up
Yep.
working with Smitty later on with Promise Keepers, and he was a part of all of those with the Maranatha Praise Band. And
Okay.
um, so it's just so many relationships through that time. And John Andrew Schreiner, who's
Yep.
produced a lot of stuff, and ended up playing with. We toured together some with Twyla. He played keys and then went on to play with Donna Summer.
So
And
now this was all based out of that Oklahoma area. All this was happening there.
well, the getting signed was, but when I went to LA to record the second album
Gotcha. Okay.
for Zondervan, for Milk and
Yeah.
Honey, and Jonathan David Brown produced that record, and that year he had done, oh my gosh, well, Twyla, he was doing Twyla's albums and so many big records. It produced the Kelly Willard records that I love so much in the early days, and a lot of the
Yeah.
Maranatha Praise music in the early days. Jonathan, was a part of that. When
He
he
worked with
passed away.
everybody. Yeah, he worked
He
with Mark
did,
Hurd, Scott Wesley
yeah.
Brown, Bob Bennett, all of those guys. Yeah.
Petra, yeah, and that big
Yeah.
Bob Bennett record was that year that he recorded mine. He cut Twyla Paris's, I think it was, it might have been the Warriors of Child record, or Keeping My Eyes on You is what it was. It was Keeping My Eyes on You record, and my record Surrender, Bob Bennett's record that was the album of the year. And all those guys were playing on it. So it was I was just really lucky to be around a bunch of incredible musicians. But I think stylistically, a lot of that influenced me because I love so many styles of music.
Right. Yeah.
But the truth is when I was younger, what I did best were things like the Eagles and James Taylor, and the sound that really had begun to form a lot of, the 90s country. Even when Garth Brooks, I remember when Garth came to town there and he got signed, and I actually met him and we talked for a second. And, James Taylor was a huge influence for him as well. So I think what we call country today was definitely more pop music when we were in the 70s, as teenagers growing
I can see
up.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so I began to write, and, I had a song recorded by Lee Greenwood and a band called Highway 101 that, I had a song on that album and started doing some things like that, and then met Gary Chapman.
Right.
And Gary had a production company and publishing company, and who had just a bunch of great people around, and then introduced me to the guys at Reunion Records. Mike Blanton and Dan Harrell was a part of that, who were managing Amy, and just incredible team of people there happening. And so they were very interested in me and signed me, and they were partnering with RCA Records. I think maybe even BMG ended up purchasing, if I recall. And so my stuff was being co-marketed, if you will, to the country marketplace as well. And that's when we dropped Murphy off the name, just because of Michael Martin Murphy. There was a lot of confusion.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And they would think, was that you? I'm like, well, no, I was like a freshman in high school, I think, when Wildfire came out, but
yeah.
But anyway, that's how I ended up kind of getting more to that acoustic sound. And again, my college roommate, Bobby Price, and I had been writing 90% of the things I was recording. It was what the two of us were writing together. And so, and that's where that happened. Yeah.
So you wrote together pretty much all through your recording career then?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Continue to do that. And so we were, in fact, in college, before I got signed, we would travel and do after game fellowships for churches. We did, youth retreats and concerts in churches. And a lot of times Bobby would preach and I would sing and lead worship. So worship was always a critical part of what I was doing. In fact, living in Nashville, we were a part of two great churches there, Belmont Church and then New Song Christian Fellowship that was launched later. And I led worship at both of those places and played in the worship band. And so at Belmont, it was really great because Amy Grant was there leading, and Michael W. Smith, Paul Overstreet, and so many other great people. And I would lead worship, regularly there and be a part of the band and everything. And so it was just a really amazing community. And we were a part of helping plant and launch what became New Song Christian Fellowship there that Jack Hayford had kind of been behind. Yeah. And Dale Everest came from California to Nashville and planted there out in Franklin. And we were a part of their first building, and there got to lead worship and play in the band. And my small group that I was in was Michael Mardian was the small group leader.
Too bad he never made anything of his life.
Yeah, I mean, he produced top pop hits in 4 decades.
Yeah.
Chester Thompson, who played drums with Phil Collins and Genesis and Weather Report, and was in the group. Donna Summer's husband. Was he was in that, and Billy Gaines. Billy passed away a few years ago as well, but Billy was in that. So we had a great small group.
Wow.
those guys were all kind of, well, Billy and I were close to the same age, but I was a younger guy and they were older guys, but God really used them profoundly in our life. And they're really kind of a part of my story of,
Yeah.
we were, had a lot of success there at Reunion, and, 4 Dove Award wins,
Yep.
and all of that stuff happened. And in 2000 and, let me get my dates figuring it, remembering here. Uh, let's see. No, I'm sorry. In 1996, yeah, I had done the last record there with Reunion, and was started having vocal problems and
Mm.
didn't know what was going on. And actually, Bruce Carroll and I were doing a series of dates where it was kind of an unplugged thing, and he
Okay.
would play for my songs. I would play with his songs. It was really great. And I'll never forget, we were in Paducah, Kentucky, and I literally just couldn't sing anymore, and I didn't know what was going on. Freaked me out.
Mm.
So Amy Grant actually got me an appointment with Dr. Ossoff, which is at the Vanderbilt Voice Center at Vanderbilt
Okay.
University, who's operated on many major vocalists in the world on their voices, and they found
Right.
a large blood blister, a polyp on my vocal
Oh,
cord.
wow.
So I had to have surgery. That was January of '96, and they went and found it was just a benign. It was an injury, they think, probably when I was playing football in high
Okay.
school, or I did intramural stuff in college as well. But um, and we needed to remove that, and so I had to cancel. That was January. He says, I need you to cancel all your dates until like April. And so I was kind of freaking out about that, and actually was in negotiations with Sony at that point to do a mainstream record, a mainstream country record with Michael Marty producing.
Oh, wow.
Reba McEntire's team were managing me at the time, and so it all seemed to be kind of moving that way, because I had been a part of the big Promise Keeper events as a guest
Mm-hmm.
artist,
Right.
and really felt like God was opening doors for me, just in ministering to men and to the family. Um, and the country music marketplace was opening up in such a way because of Paul Overstreet and Ricky Skaggs at the time, who were
Sure.
pretty bold in their faith. And so guys, like especially Bruce Carroll and I were kind of in the middle of a lot of that.
Yeah.
But
So how did this so this is kind of a put the brakes on everything. And
oh
were
man,
you feeling like, "Oh my gosh, my career is over," or were you feeling like this
yeah.
was was God, did you see God's direction changing your path at that point, or was this kind of like, "Oh my gosh, I just hit a wall"?
Well, I want to go back just the second to say my senior year in high school, after being offered that position with the Cruz family,
Right.
I felt God's call to the ministry, and so I surrendered to the ministry. And my church licensed me and all of that,
Okay.
prayed over me, the elders, and all of that. And so there was an initial calling deep in my heart, and I just knew for the season I was in, that it was going to be primarily singing in churches around, and singing to Christians and
Right.
encouraging the body of Christ wherever God would take me to do that. When this surgery thing hit, I called I called Michael Martin and the guys, and they got together and they said, "Hey, we really believe God is literally shutting you up
Hmm.
to speak to your heart." Uh, and now, also in the same time, my wife and I, we had a daughter at the time, and that's a whole other story. Of we weren't. My wife had a pituitary adenoma that was preventing us from having any children, but
Hmm.
through experimental drug protocol, she ended up getting pregnant. We had Brittany
Oh,
in
wow.
1982. So this was, again,
Yeah.
this was 96. But
Yeah.
we had been praying for more kids, and our small group, our couple small group that we had, were always surrounding us in prayer with that. And through a benefit concert in Wichita, Kansas, to help raise funds for the Pregnancy Crisis Center,
Okay.
we were connected and were able to be in process to adopt.
Ah.
And so our son Calvin, who's about to turn 24, was on the way. And so
Okay.
I also had that on me. Like, we've got a new child we're adopting. I've been on the road a lot, and my wife and I were getting pretty tired of the traveling and the touring. Once I got there, it was great, but the whole process in between was
Yeah.
difficult. So
Yeah.
that was on top. All at the same time, we had this child that was on the way, and that was going to change our lives.
Yeah.
And so my small group guys just said, hey man, we think God's trying to really speak to you and he has shut you up. And so we want you to really be listening. And I remember Dale Everest, our pastor there at New Song, had had been in a series called Crossing Over, and kind of talking about crossing over the crossing over the river into that new promised land,
Oh, right.
and
Okay.
that God may be calling some of you to a new day, and that really began to stick deeply within me. And so,
So how did you receive all of this? I mean, this is a lot of stuff being
oh
pushed
man,
on a very successful thing that
yeah.
has a potential of, oh God, we're going to do so much more for you when we take this mainstream. And how did that affect your emotionally and spiritually? And that's a huge transition.
Well, it was a frightening time. It was exciting because the thing was, well, hey, we'll get you out opening for Reba, and at that time Reba was you know huge and playing arenas and everything, and that's how they kind of did it in country music. It was like they call it a third act, and you would kind of get 20 minutes, and
Hmm.
so there was all these plans that we had, but it was scary to me, and I will tell you that some of the guys in my small group basically said, we know you're financially was my biggest concern because
Sure. Oh,
my
yeah.
playing live was basically how you fed your family, and those guys literally took care of us for 4 months.
Wow.
And it was kind of part of it. We're going to help take care of you. Just want you to hear God, get your surgery done, and go through your recovery with that. And so I couldn't speak after the surgery. Everything was great with the surgery, but I wasn't able to speak. They won't let you
Okay.
talk for like I think it's 3 or 4 weeks. And right as I began to where I could start talking, went through the rehab there at Vanderbilt. I got a call from a church in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I had done concerts before, but some of the men on their board, their elder board there, had seen me sing at Texas Stadium or at the Astrodome at one of the
Okay.
big Promise Keeper events. And the pastor and executive pastor there called and said, "Hey, well, the executive pastor called me. He said, 'Hey, man, I just want to share with you what God's doing here, and we really feel like God wants us to open up and to really reach our culture here for Christ, and we want to use worship and arts.'" And at that point, churches were just kind of moving into more contemporary, experiential kinds of services that were very
Right.
different, and from the kind of structured pathways that some of this had been a Southern Baptist church. And I said, "Well, great." I felt in my heart, I'm like, I don't know, man, this is exciting vision. I called my wife and said, I just got a call from these guys. I talked to them for an hour, and I feel like that this may be something that I actually could hang. I could hang my hat on that and get behind a vision like that. And they want to
Sure.
come out and talk to us. So they flew out to Nashville, and we went to dinner, and I basically tried to convince them like, hey man, I'm not really a fan of church music guys.
Yeah.
Like at the time how it was, I'm like, I'm not your choir director, let's do a cantata, Easter cantata, or let's do the Christmas musical, but if you really want to reach people using the arts, and you want to build a heart of worship into the church, I'll be all about that. So they asked me to come out and lead worship. My first date back, and it was interesting, I said, well, my first concert back is in April, and I'm
Okay.
playing in Albuquerque, of all places, at University of New Mexico with Rich Mullins, because
Ah,
Rich and I were label mates there at Reunion,
right.
and so we did that. Played there with Rich on Friday night at the university, and then Saturday and Sunday was at the church. And Henry Blackaby was a guest speaker at the church there. It was Hoffmantown Church there in Albuquerque, and we met with their elders and their team there, and just really felt like God's call was on that. So
Ah.
we shocked all of our friends in Nashville, and kind of packed up and started a new journey. It was a life gate for me, and I kind of closed the door on the music industry, but really felt like God was in that.
So how long did that process take? I mean, you had the surgery and you recovered
Yeah,
until about April.
yeah. I sang there in April and accepted that position like in May, but didn't go there till August because
Okay.
I had concerts through that I needed obligations to do that, and we got had to take care of getting our home sold in Nashville and all that kind
Sure.
of stuff.
So did you feel like this was an extension of that call that you'd received as a young person?
Totally, totally, totally. And I don't think I realized until I got there and got in the position and began to build, and that's kind of what really at my heart is. I'm a builder,
Mhm.
and to try to kind of build things from the scratch, from the ground up there to launch, what in 4 years, the church doubled in size.
Wow.
After we launched these two, we launched a Saturday night service and then a Sunday 11 service. So the church went from like, it was like 2,000 to 4,500 in four
Okay.
years growth.
Wow. Wonderful.
And it was a lot of great things. So, but I wasn't prepared to realize that, the beautiful thing about God's writing our story is how sometimes we're in the middle of it all and we don't even realize until later do we look back at how strategic,
Right.
the people that I got to work with, the studios, the artists that I got to be around and have friendships with and play with. I got the best education while I studied music and communication in college. This was a whole other level of education. And I had a passion to see the church, especially in the area of worship and music and how it was executed and how it was created and poured into the hearts of the volunteers that were part of that,
Hmm.
to take the same bar, the level of excellence and how we do things in studios and in Nashville, and to take that and to implement that in the church. And things like click tracks that I introduced a click track back in the day, when now that's the whole church world is clicks and
Mm.
support tracks, stem tracks, and
Yeah.
everything else. And at that time, that just really wasn't very common at all. And so it was. I don't know. I was grateful. Our son Calvin was born. We were new in ministry, a lot of change.
Yeah.
And by the way, a year and a half later, we were able to adopt another a child as a daughter, and that's Brooke, our youngest, and she just turned 22.
Wow.
So pretty cool part of our story of God using my gift of music to
Right.
go and sing at a pregnancy center and to help them raise money and to kind of pour into them, and then God blesses us with two amazing
Yeah.
miracles through
Yeah.
that, which is super cool.
Well, let's talk a little bit about you're talking about your passion for worship, and did that start developing after you accepted that position in Arizona, or was that something that you saw kind of growing through
No.
your concert ministry and singing in churches?
Yeah, it was always interesting. I would always do a worship set in my concerts, and over and over I would have pastors or people go, man, we love your records and we love the songs, but man, the worship part tonight was just, so powerful. And so I will never forget, there was a pastor in Knoxville, Tennessee, who Chris Knight is his name, and Chris said over me, and it's amazing how we remember these little things, but playing at a concert there, he got up and prayed for me and just said, he told me personally, he says, you have the gift of the psalmist.
Ah.
And I will never forget that. And so you know, for many of those years through this church journey, I've that's been a part of me. And I've got a verse. I actually just got my first tattoo at 61 years old, which is awesome, right? But it's on my wrist, and it says Psalm 43, 40
Okay.
verse 3.
Right.
And so if you read Psalm 140, verses 1 through 3, it talks about, I cried out to the Lord, he inclined to me, he heard my cry, he lifted me up out of the miry pit. You set my feet upon a rock, you established my footsteps. And then verse 3 goes on and says, and he put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to
Mm.
our God. And as a result, many will be amazed and fear and come to know the Lord. So that
Yes.
became my ministry verse that I was trying to live out, was that authentic worship, the new song of our rescue out of
Right.
that pit, is powerful, and that God will use that people will be amazed and come to know Christ. And so through that, I think God really put in my heart a real heart of evangelism, and the worship evangelism thing,
Yeah.
has been critical for that for me.
So that was planted by, again, a relationship or a
Yeah.
interaction you had with somebody in a concert setting, kind of out of left field, so to speak,
Yeah.
and that's planted that seed to say, maybe there's something else that God's got for me.
Yeah. And I heard that over and over from people and from different pastors,
Uh-huh.
and always was a part of volunteering and leading. In Nashville, in those days, they didn't need to pay for a worship pastor because
Right.
they were everywhere, so they just needed someone to organize and schedule us. And
Yeah.
but being around that and being around some of the incredible, there were musicians I was around, a guy named Don Potter. Don played all the Judge records and produced and arranged a lot of that. And Don played on. He mentored me as acoustic player. Don
Ah,
was an incredible, godly man, but just having people like that speak into my life. It's funny, and I thought it was all about the journey as an artist and a songwriter, but the truth was that God had very specific, ideas as to what
yeah.
path He wanted me to be on.
Well, I'm interested, as we talked gearing up to this, we talked about one of my passions about this podcast is to share about community and how
Yeah.
community is important. And
Oh,
the story that specifically stuck in my mind was the transition that you were making between, um, being a traveling musician and maybe having something that God's calling you to, and that you didn't, it sounds to me like you maybe weren't recognizing that in yourself, but you had this group of people, this community that was saying,
yeah.
maybe you should look at this.
Yeah, totally. And I think that that's so critical for any, even today, any of the artists that are traveling, um, or if you're a salesman, if you're away from home a lot, or if you're an executive who's traveling the world, which I've ministered to a lot of those guys in churches I've
Right.
served at, you got to have that community base. That's the important part of the church that God intended. And that's been the struggle with this pandemic that we've been in, is just not being able to be together and to have community. Now, beautifully enough, the technology's helped accomplish a lot of that. But
Right.
you're totally right. And I think the things from Michael Mardian that I learned, the things from Hadley Hawkinsmith, I my first concert I ever saw was Andre Crouch and
Oh, wow.
in Amarillo, Texas, and I was an eighth grader.
That
And
sets the bar.
yeah, yeah, and Hadley's playing guitar. He's playing guitar, and I'm just in this album that we had this traveling evangelist who was playing this music before a service, and I'm like, what is that? And he goes, it's a
Yeah.
band called Seth, and Seth was out of Oklahoma City,
Mhm.
and it's a rare little find if anyone can find it out there. But Jonathan David Brown produced it. He was in that band along with Kelly Willard, Hadley Hawkinsmith, a bunch of those. There's a whole group of those guys that ended up. Some of them played for Andre, and went on to be great. I mean, Hadley's been with Neil Diamond now for, gosh,
Yeah,
I guess since
for a long time.
the early '90s, probably, or late '80s, I guess. But yeah, so each of those people in a special way impacted me. In 1986, for a year and a half, I toured with Dallas Home,
Mm,
and
mhm.
I did the similar thing that I did with Twilight. I got a 40-minute set in front of Dallas, and then I helped lead the band and played keys and guitars with him. And Dallas pastored me in many ways and taught me the
Mm,
heart of ministry. And that was always at the forefront for me. It was like mostly about the ministry, and I wanted excellence in music as a musician, but
yeah,
that truly being in ministry. And I've got friends in Nashville that said, man, when you left, it really spoke highly that, oh wait, this guy he really was trying to be in ministry.
right.
That was kind of cool to hear many years later. Multiple people sharing that with me. So,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of guys that are out there like that have, like you said, that have done the same thing, that are now pastoring, and it's just cool to see.
Well, kind of one of the things I heard you say is that, your community evolves, and I think a lot of times we think, "Well, I have my community around me, but they're not speaking into where I'm at right now," but that doesn't mean that God doesn't have another community there for you, and that community doesn't mean
Mhm.
once it's set, you forget it, right? So
Oh, totally.
you've had these opportunities with different artists that you've worked with, the different places that you've been in, and God has always put you in a place where you've got community to be,
Yes.
surrounding you. But what does it take for you to find those new communities? Did they just come to you, or did you seek them out?
Oh man, I feel like they were kind of divine appointments. Like, for instance, I had met Gary Chapman down in Texas years earlier, because a friend of mine, Jerry McPherson, was playing guitar for Amy and Amy Grant, and Jerry was from Houston, and I had met
Mhm.
Jerry early on in the early '80s, and so we're in Nashville, and some friends of ours that I had produced her record back in Tulsa. We had kind of lost touch with one another, and they had moved to Nashville, and we didn't know they had moved to Nashville. And we had moved recently, and we were attending a small church when we first got to town, and she was at the post office sending some music off, and he's like, "Oh, you're in music," and this person was Leslie Glassford, and I
Okay.
produced a couple of records on her, and then she was in a group called Tuesday's Child
Okay.
that had
Right.
a couple of albums on Benson back in the '90s. He goes, "Well, we just had a guy in his family, and his wife and little girl just started coming to our church and said who it was." And she goes, "Oh my gosh, we're best friends. We just
Oh,
lost touch
fun.
with one another." So we get connected. We'll come to find out Jimmy
Right.
Abag or Jimmy A lived next door in the apartment complex there in Bellevue in Nashville. And we get connected, and meet Jimmy. And of course, Jimmy was working with Rich Mullins at the
Right.
time, as part of the Ragamuffins. And Jimmy hears some of my songs. He's like, "Hey man, and these were some of the country things I was writing, but these were songs like Slow Down Daddy, and That's What a Brother Is For, that
Hmm.
were off that first record with Reunion." And he goes, "Gary Chapman's got this. He's got a killer studio. It's in the same building as the Reunion Records building, and he's got a production company and publishing company he's put together." He goes, "Man, he would love what you're doing." So he gave me Gary's number, and the next day I called Gary, and he answered, and like, "Yeah, man, let's get together."
Right.
And then I ended up signing with him a production and publishing deal that ended up. I think he was a part owner in Reunion Records. He and Amy were at that
Okay.
time. And so that's how, again, I got connected to Reunion, but that was all because of friendships that I had in Tulsa, who had relocated back to Nashville and ended up meeting, Jimmy A, and
Right.
Jimmy making that connection. So it was all this, amazing. I don't know if it was anything that I ever did. It was just kind of being in the right place at the right time, and kind of God may have intervened.
Well, and relying on the fact that God does have the people that you need to surround you
Yeah.
with.
Oh,
Yeah.
totally, totally,
Yeah.
totally.
Well, one of the things that I like to hear is I like to hear people's testimony about how they came to the
Hmm.
Lord. And
Mm,
you mentioned
yeah.
you and I are both preachers' kids, but for me, it didn't really become real. My relationship with God didn't really become real until I was in college. It was
Yeah.
what I was trained to do. So, how did you come to where your personal faith in Jesus was your own and
Yeah.
was the part that changed your?
Yes. Well, there's kind of two pivotal moments when I came to Christ as a young boy, but also I want to talk about a time in 1984 when I was on tour with Twyla, and a situation that occurred that God really brought the meaning of worship to a place in my heart and life that I really grew to understand. So, being a pastor's son, obviously a godly family, grandparents, great grandparents, rich family history, and
Right.
rich family legacy from a spiritual standpoint, which I just feel blessed for. But we had a missionary come to our church and shared. I was a 9-year old young boy,
Okay.
uh, and I just became very convicted, and actually had watched Billy Graham on television. I was feeling the tug of the Holy Spirit even then, before that.
Okay.
But I told my parents, I realized that I'm a pastor's son and I'm at church everywhere. And I think even at 9, I think I know what this whole faith journey is about, but
Right.
I'm realizing that I've never received the gift of salvation and never
Uh,
professed, to make him Lord and Savior of my life. And so they walked with me through that, prayed with me, and then had my dad, he baptized me,
uh-huh.
which is super special.
Yeah.
And he baptized all of my kids too, by the way, which is a
Very
super
cool.
cool thing before his passing. But
Yeah.
yeah, so there was that, and growing in that, and then feeling the call to ministry at 18 years old, and then going, touring with the Cruz family. And then I went to Hardin Simmons University and met my lifelong co-writing partner, but also like he's not my blood brother, but he's everything
Right.
but that. And he and his wife are dear, dear friends, and through all these years. In '84, while we were touring with Twyla, we had Brittany at 82
Mhm.
in 1982, which was a miracle
Mhm.
because of this pituitary adenoma that my wife had.
Right.
The University of Texas Medical Center, she was in a drug protocol with them, and that's how Brittany came along. And we've been praying for more children, obviously. And then in '84, she was pregnant again, and we went through some real difficulty with an individual who was part of my ministry
Okay.
at the time, and some just really awful things went down. There was some stressful things. We were living in Texas back then, and just a difficult time. And my wife lost that baby in the
Oh,
6th month of pregnancy.
oh, wow.
And through that brokenness, and the oil crash hit in Texas, and the guy that was helping us had some major problems that he was navigating, and
Hmm.
we moved back to San Antonio, where my wife had grown up and lived in a house that she grew up in. I was in between record deals. I had stepped away from Zondervan, and it was before I signed with Home Sweet Home with Chris Christians and did that record.
Right.
And I had concerts I was doing, and was doing some guitar playing for people and whatnot. But I went to work for my wife's father to help put food on the table, and they let us
Right.
live in this house that they no longer lived in. But so I drove a water truck. He was a large construction, like earth movers and all of that.
Okay.
And I was low man on the totem pole, man, driving a water truck or driving a steamroller.
Yeah.
And then I would go sing at a church on a weekend. But God taught me a lot through that, and brought some dear friendships that I had in college that lived there. And I did a lot of duck hunting and fishing and just normal guy stuff. And as God healed our hearts. But I can remember after losing that child and going through all of this, as we would sing worship and services. And I remember this is really great. But Don Moen had released one of the first albums on Integrity,
Okay.
Hosanna, which was Give Thanks.
Okay.
And I know that my wife and we would stand in church and sing some of these songs, and all we could really do was just weep. It was just like
Mm.
the meaning of the lyrics of that. And that's part of this first part of Psalm 40, when I say the Lord heard my cry and he lived, because we were in a pit of depression. We were in a pit of
Oh,
brokenness,
sure.
and didn't know what was, the future. And God, what have you made me to do? I was having a crisis
Yeah.
in 84, which I was just 25 years old, having a bit of a crisis in my life of like, what's next? What's going to happen? And, but that was really where the power of worship and what, you know, um, being lifted up out of that pit, and saying, he established my footsteps and he set my foot upon a rock, and put a song of praise in my mouth. And so I felt like that was really when God began to birth a new song in my heart.
Mm.
Um, was through those difficult seasons. And
Yeah.
then from there, we, ended up moving on out to Tennessee. And, by 1990 is when I met. So that was 84 and 85, 86 and 7. I toured with Dallas Home for 2 years, where Dallas just really mentored me in so many ways,
Mm.
with his rich legacy of, and
Yeah.
in college, our little group would sing Rise Again. And now here I am
Yeah.
playing it every night and singing with him.
What a kick.
And yeah, I mean, and he's still out there doing it, and it's really incredible. But yeah, he had a profound impact, as did the Cruz family. Uh, Papa Cruz just passed away this last month, and
Mm.
I just reminisced on the impact that he and his wife made, and all the Cruz. To this day, I still feel very much a part of that family, that they poured into me. And Cindy was,
Yeah.
14 at the time,
Yeah.
and still
Yeah.
amazing everyone with her voice.
Yeah.
So all of those different people that God allowed me to be around, they all have had a profound impact in mentoring me in some way about ministry, and especially Dallas, because man, Dallas, it was all about ministry. He would sing, but at the end, he would give a message, an evangelistic message, and then just scores of people would come to faith every night. It was just
Yeah.
incredible. So I've just been able to be around a lot of people that have influenced me in a powerful and profound way, that have impacted my life and who I am today.
And so now you're using these experiences that you've been through as you've been mentored, and you're starting to do this, not starting, I mean, you've been doing
Yeah,
this with the different people that you're working with at your churches. So we left you,
yeah,
I think we left you in Arizona. You've been at
yeah. New
several other
Mexico.
churches since then. Okay, New Mexico,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And you've
Albuquerque, New
been at
Mexico.
several other churches since then, right?
Yeah, yeah. So after 4 incredible years in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I get a call from Gene Apple. Actually, I got a call from Central Christian Church out in Las Vegas, Central Church. I got a call. They were exploding. Gene Apple was the pastor at the time. Gene's now the senior pastor at Eastside Christian Church in Anaheim, and thriving,
Okay.
amazing church. And someone had read in Christian CCM magazine, whatever happened to Michael James? And it was like, well, he left Nashville. He's now a worship pastor at Hoffmantown Church in Albuquerque. So I get an email like, hey, we'd love for you to come lead worship at our new community service in Vegas.
Okay.
So I go out there on a Wednesday night and place is packed. And Central was in this, at that time, they were in this building in this neighborhood and had a gymnasium and were in multiple services. It had just exploded because Vegas was exploding in growth.
Right. That time.
And then so God kind of began to work through that with Gene. And I get a call from him one day. He goes, hey, man, I need a worship pastor. And so in 2000, we accepted the call to Vegas, and we were there for almost 13 years. And in that
Wow.
time, worked with Gene there for 4 years, and then Judd Wilhite. Gene went to Willow Creek
Okay.
on staff up there, and then we called Judd Wilhite as our new senior pastor, and so I was partnering there with Judd at Central. And between 2000 and the end of 2012, when we moved, that church had gone from about 4,000 to 25,000 in multiple
Oof.
sites.
Yeah.
And so during that time period, I kind of began to move as I got older. And my father passed away in 2010, which was pretty traumatic, losing him. I'm the oldest son, and he was
Okay.
just such a profound idol in the best sense of the word
Okay.
to
Yeah.
me, but still pretty difficult. And I turned 50. So I was in this season of transition and
All
went
right.
through a life plan process with one of my best friends, a guy named Lance Witt. Lance written some awesome books, including a book called Replenish that I recommend for everybody to just about replenishing your soul and keeping your soul healthy. And in that life plan process, I came away with a life purpose statement and a life mission statement. The
Mm.
purpose statement is why I am on this earth,
Mm-hmm.
and that is to reflect the heart of God and to help others experience the heart of God. So that's kind of the part of the worship and what God does in the church setting, especially in
Right.
a weekend. And then the mission, which your life mission can shift and change as your life changes.
Yeah.
And after losing my dad, Dr. Patricia Mai in Vegas, who is still my counselor, gave me a book of my dad died called Return of the Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen.
Okay.
And she said, Michael, I believe that God is trying to show you that it's time for you to become the benevolent father in the picture here,
Mm.
and to take that on. And so that became a very profound time. And so my mission statement began to be, I exist to be a father who pours into the personal, spiritual, and ministry lives of leaders.
Mm.
And so I lead worship now. I play in the band often, 2 or 3 times
Right.
a month. I lead here and there. I lead for our online prayer nights every Wednesday. But many years back, actually, I moved from being the guy out front to putting the younger guys out front. And during
Yeah.
that season, at Central saw that happen, and some young leaders that came right out of high school right onto the main platform there that God has continued to use profoundly.
Sure.
And but that all came as a result of those different seasons of understanding. This is what I'm to do now. And so uh, I was at Central there for until almost right at the end of 2012, and then had an opportunity to go up to the New York City area and be a part of a church plant there that one of the senior partners at Goldman Sachs planted
Oh,
about 10
wow.
years earlier, to reach basically his friends and neighbors who happened to be major C-level people on Wall Street.
Sure. Yeah.
And so here's this farm kid from Texas that's been a musician. I find myself, sitting in a church finance meeting as the executive pastor with Wall Street giants all around me. But
Oh,
man, and,
wow.
and we were there for 4 years. It was just amazing, the relationships we made, and what I learned was the way my dad pastored those farmers and ranchers. It was the same thing there, just being a
Mm-hmm.
part of people's lives,
Yep.
and that was a beautiful time of helping that church kind of take a step to a new day. And then got a call about 4 years ago. Got a call from Chip Ingram, who was senior pastor here at Venture Christian Church here in Los Gatos, which is a suburb of San Jose.
Okay.
We're all part of the Bay Area, the San Francisco. We are the heart of Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Netflix and eBay and Google, and all those are just,
All those biggies. Yep.
they're all right here. Facebook, they're all here with us. And so we moved, well, October will be 4 years for us here. We moved here, and I came on here as executive pastor, same kind of title and role I had at
Yeah.
Central, executive pastor of Weekend Experience. So I'm kind of over worship and branding and marketing and communications and film and all kind of creative things. And so it was an honor to get to come with Chip. Of course, Chip's got a global radio program called Living on the Edge, and is, God's using him powerfully. So he was here. He's still in our church, but he resigned as senior pastor because of all that was happening with Living on the Edge.
Okay.
And now Tim Lundy is our new pastor. Tim will be here. He just 2 years now.
Okay.
He's been here, and so I've got an incredible team. I've got the worship pastor that I hired here was a guy that I helped mentor. His wife happens to be the daughter of the family I talked about, Leslie Glassford in Nashville,
Right.
So that's how integral these stories are. That's just profound for me, is that
Yeah.
they're on staff with me now, as well as a few other folks like that. And so getting to be a part of so many different staff members throughout my years in ministry has just been a blessing to see how God has woven that together.
Well, the thing that just as you've been telling your story, just is I'm always amazed at how God puts people in our paths, and sometimes they come in and out of our stories, and the
Yeah.
importance of, understanding that God really does have our back, and he really does look out for us when we don't even realize we're being looked out for.
Oh, totally. Oh my gosh.
And the chance, quote unquote, meetings that we have with people are God divine appointments. And for us to recognize those around us and not take them for granted, and say, okay, let me pour into the people that God's putting into my life right now, because you never know when you're a divine appointment for somebody else,
Yeah.
and where they're that divine appointment for you. So
Yeah, and I've also learned that, and we've been through just some, truthfully, and we all go through these, but these seasons and these moments of real despair and of brokenness again, and we find ourselves sometimes feeling like we're in a desert situation. There's a song that Bobby Price and I wrote that's on my Shoulder to the Wind album called "In the Wilderness," and it is questioning God. God, where's my burning bush?
right.
And so the chorus is, in the wilderness until the things in my life don't reflect your holiness, basically. I know one day I'll stand in the promised land, but for now I'm here while I become your righteousness. So the point being that all of these difficulties of losing a child, of kind of going through financial ruin at the same time, and
Yeah.
multiple difficult things we've walked through, losing my dad, and as traumatic as that was for me, and we've all been losing both my wife's parents, and through those hurts and those brokenness seasons, and through those seasons where we feel like we are in a desert and that sometimes God's not hearing us.
Yeah.
The truth is that he's trying to help make all things work together for our good to teach.
Right.
And he's done that so many times over and over again to me. Of, I need you to learn this about yourself and who you are. A friend of mine always says this. I love this. I mean, it says God is way more concerned about what he does in me than what he does through me.
Wow.
And that has been a big statement to go, yes, because
Yeah.
I tend to want to be always doing the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
And I think part of my season of coming out of counseling I received after my dad's death was, I've got to learn to be.
Yes.
And my life now is more about being the work of the ministry, and especially in the lives of those I'm leading and mentoring now in this season of my life, is being over doing.
Yeah.
And, and I've struggled with that. With the Lord knows that I'm always like, God, I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to go do this for you.
Yep.
This kind of performance oriented faith. And he's just been trying to teach me, no, I just want you to be my child, and just to rest in the arms of your Father.
Yeah. It's not a mistake that we're called human beings and not human
Yes.
beings.
That's good. Yeah. That's awesome. Yes.
Well, Michael, I know you know this, but we have a group of people that are committed to praying for musicians and people who
Oh
are
man.
using music. How can we be praying for you in these next months?
Yeah, I think it's just to pray that I will stay in tune to the Holy Spirit. Pray for patience. I think as I get older, there's a sense of urgency that I want to see things happen quicker. When it comes to change in the church and where we need to be as a church to try to reach more people, we're in the process of really trying to venture our church. We're a church of about 5,000 people, but we are in the most unreached part of the world, or of the country rather, right now here in the Bay Area. And
Mhm.
it's which I thought coming from New York City that was impossible, but it is. It's like, and
Yeah.
we have here what we call the uninterested. So
Oh,
it's not that we've got tons of atheists out there. We just have people who are just completely uninterested. They
right.
they they don't see nor understand any need
Yeah.
for faith or church or anything, and it's so post-Christian here. So I
Yeah.
think for me, pray for God would give me patience, and to be about being, overdoing, and that God would just use my leadership in any way possible to help us get closer to leading our church to truly being an outreach focused church that we could literally see, like I did in Vegas. I saw
Mhm.
thousands of people come to Christ, and
Right.
I am hungry to see that happen here as well.
I'd like to thank Michael James Murphy for taking the time to chat with me today. I'm grateful for the reminder that the relationships we are in today may very well be someone's divine appointment. Or, quite equally, they could be divine appointments for where God is going to lead us in the future. Well, thank you for listening today. Would you be willing to help me out by taking a couple of minutes to review this podcast? Your thoughts and insights really help other people decide that this is something they might like to listen to. Oh, and I'd love to connect with you as well, so feel free to drop me an email on my website, christianmusicarchive.com, or through one of my social media sites. You can send me a direct message on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Patreon by searching at CCM Exchange. You'll probably notice that I don't have any advertising on this podcast, but that doesn't mean there are no costs in making it happen. As a result, this podcast is made possible through the generous support of listeners like you. Head on over to patreon.com/CCM Exchange to learn how you can get involved and keep these podcasts going. In the meantime, for more information about Michael James Murphy and other artists like him, head on over to christianmusicarchive.com. And until next Wednesday, when I present you with my next conversation, remember that God loves you. In fact, He's crazy about you.